Hello, I'm Donal Macaulay and welcome to medicsvoices.com, where we talk to the key opinion leaders in health and medicine around the world. Today I'm talking to Pedro Delgado. Now Pedro, you've had a remarkable journey from Venezuela, educated in the US, working with IHI in Boston, but you're based in Europe. Tell us a little bit about your academic journey and what you do now.
Hi, Don. It's so good to be here with you. And yes, a bit of a global spirit for sure at heart. Actually, I grew up in Venezuela, went to college in the US, did a master's in the UK, and have been here primarily for the last 20 years. I studied psychology as my primary degree, and then I did a master's in healthcare leadership and management, and have been a passionate student of quality improvement, patient safety, population health improvement, and equity over the last 20 to 25 years, and that's a space that I inhabit. So yeah, my work is primarily in Europe these days, but I've done work all over the world, which has been really enriching for me, and I feel very privileged to have done that.
So you're a very senior leadership role in IHI. Tell us about IHI and what your aims and objectives are.
Yeah, that's such a good question, and I'll try to be brief on this. I'm super passionate about what we do, but we're a non-for-profit, so we just over 30 years ago we brought the quality improvement methods that were being used in industry into healthcare, and in doing that, we've learned a lot over the last 30 plus years. Again, as a not-for-profit institute, we have a mission, which is to improve health and healthcare worldwide, and a vision, which is that every patient, every citizen gets the best health and care possible. Now, that's easily said and very, very hard to do. So we're backed by 4 values, which help us stay grounded, and our relationships with our partners around the world stay grounded. So one is courage. Sometimes in healthcare, it takes more than just being nice to get through some of the challenges and gaps that we're trying to close together with partners. The second one is equity. It's a historical fact that we continue to leave populations behind, and we're keen to right that wrong. So equity is kind of engraved into our values, and it's something that we try to act as well as think, as well as write it. So equity, courage, trust. We think improvement moves at the speed of trust. So trust is a third value, and the fourth one is love. Because there's a foundational element to what we do, which is inherently humane, and unless you're grounded on that, in order to push science and betterment and so on, then you're on a road to nothing. So courage, equity, trust, and love are the 4 values that guide IHI. And as a not-for-profit, we do work globally with partners to try to improve health and healthcare worldwide so that everyone has the best health and care possible.
One of the things that fascinates me about IHI is its global impact. We're all focused very much on our own healthcare systems. There must be huge differences between different countries.
Yeah, it's one of the beauties, and the privileges, I have to say, of both having grown up in a country and having lived in 2 or 3 for a sustained period of time, and also being able to do work across frontiers, across regions, and that enriches and enlightens, I suppose, the possibilities. And I'll give you an example from today. I was talking to some friends in Sweden who were describing some of the challenges now that they've signed up for NATO, now that some of the financial situations aren't as generous as they have been over the years, and how tough things felt. And this person had just visited Mexico to visit one of our friends from IHI, and I took the opportunity to reflect with him, of the fact that everything in life is relative. When you think you have a crisis and you look a little farther afield, then you understand what real poverty is, what a real crisis is, what not having resources is, and so on. So I think what the global opportunities that we have afford us is perspective primarily. And the second thing is this opportunity to bridge innovation. There are wonderful things happening in high-income countries. There are wonderful things happening in middle-income countries, and there are wonderful things happening in low-income countries. And by having a view of those three levels, you can try to build bridges that will help to accelerate learning curves by connecting people and connecting knowledge. I'm just off the call with some friends in Greece who were keen to learn about some efforts in Brazil. So that's just an example of the perspective that it gives you. So the possibility of having perspective so that you understand your reality relative to others is useful. The possibility of building bridges to knowledge and innovation and improvement. And the third thing is the opportunity that we have to ground the work in pure humanity, because underneath our skin, underneath our bones and our blood and so on, is a sentient human who wants to do a good job, who's grounded usually in love, who's grounded usually in really good science, and by ignoring some of the labels and the languages and what country you come from, we get on the same plane, which is we're human beings trying to do good things for other human beings and with other human beings. So those three things I think are huge privileges that we don't take for granted, actually, and we try to respect very much.
When you talk about these values and you talk about IHI, it sounds a little bit like external or extrinsic. But actually, I'd like to ask you something about your own intrinsic values, because I've heard you talk about this concept of, what is it, violent inaction?
Yeah. So let me just start by the grounding. Over the last 2 years, I've been very introspective. I feel the world is moving very fast, and sometimes it's moving in a direction that it doesn't know. Partly because we're distracted all the time. Everybody's on their mobile phones and social media and trying to respond, and we're on fifth gear all the time, and we're not changing gear. And I think that distracted progress is actually potentially taking us backwards. I think we're using violence as a solution to problems, and we have 2 wars very close to us here in Europe. And I think when you're using violence as a solution, it means that you're confused, that you're trying to solve for something that's deep and that you don't understand. So I think we're at a moment in time, and I think technology is affording us wonderful opportunities, and it's also putting some things at risk. So over the last 2 years, I've been very introspective on what my purpose is. What am I trying to do in this world, right? We only have a very limited amount of time here. How can I make the most out of it? And I started by trying to write down my purpose, Donald. So I'll start there and then move to values. My purpose is very simple in word, but it took me a while to kind of articulate it, and it may change, in the next 5 years. But it's to reduce suffering and to enhance well-being in community. To reduce suffering and enhance well-being with other people. Reduce suffering from feeling that we're not doing a good enough job, from feeling that we need to prioritize things that are counter to our values, to reduce suffering. And then obviously the suffering that comes from substandard care and substandard health. Enhance well-being. I think if you reduce suffering, you also have the possibility of enhancing well-being. And then with people, nothing that we do in life is disconnected from other human beings. So that's where I start. That's what grounds me. And when I have a tough day, when I have a long day, when I have a long trip, when I have a tough conversation, I go back to the values. And if what I'm doing is grounded out to the purpose, and if what I'm doing is grounded on that purpose, it's kind of worth it. Going through the pain of change, because I primarily work in the sphere of change, trying to work with other people who want to bring about change. So my values are grounded on my purpose, and they're also connected, I think, probably to my upbringing and the global nature of what my life has turned out to be. So humanity first, I think. So grounding ourselves in who we are and what we're about as a collective rather than an individualistic view of it. I think equity is an important value. I think for too long and too often, we continue to speak in ways that demean other people, to ignore data that's telling us that some people are being left behind. and to talk about the problem as opposed to moving to solutions. So when I mentioned to you during one of our coffee conversations, violence in action, I was referring to that. We can ponder problems, we can criticize the fact that they're there, we can criticize the people that are closest to the problem, but it's very different to watch a football game from the stands and talk about the players than it is to be on the pitch while it's raining, while it's muddy, while the opponents are angry, while very different, So it's easy to comment that a player isn't playing well enough or that they're not running fast enough than being on the pitch. And I think we need to be on the pitch. We need to move from violent inaction to loving and proactive action that serves to reduce suffering, to enhance well-being, and to do that together in community. So as you asked me about values, that's what comes kind of from the gut.
In order to put that into action, I've heard you say we need to be unreasonable. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, look, there's a gravitational pull to normative behaviors, right? So we create these narratives as human beings, and they somehow become our realities, and we act upon them. And what that sometimes does is it prevents us from asking the tougher questions of, should it be different? And would the solution need a radical approach? And do we need to stop and think? Do we need to call it out? Do we need to? And you see that with kindness. You see that with our models of care. You see that with the way that we relate to other genders, other races, other ages, other nationalities, because we are grounded on the narrative that makes our collective soul, and those narratives tend to be generic. And it's hard to extract yourself from that bubble and say, hey, let me look at the fish tank from outside the fish tank and understand what I'm doing while I'm swimming in the fish tank. So I think the opportunity for all of us to pause, to step outside, and to be maybe radical in the questioning, lovingly. I'm not talking about violence here. I'm talking about loving action that prevents violent inaction, but that is proactively doing so. And I think if we can get ourselves to pause and ask the question every so often, I think we'll be in a much better place. Inertia is one of our biggest challenges, that we do and just don't stop. And what that does is that it builds on that collective narrative. And unless we're willing to challenge it sometimes, we'll probably end up exhausting ourselves on the one hand and getting to outcomes in whatever sphere of life we're leading that are maybe not as coherent as we want with the thing that grounds us and the thing that guides us, which is love and the sense of humanity and connectivity and community. So that's what I mean when I talk about maybe being radical at times.
When we were talking a moment or two ago, you used the metaphor of the player on the pitch and the critic on the grandstand. But of course, what people don't realize is that metaphor is part of your life, because people won't know that you've been an international professional footballer. Tell us a little bit about your professional football life and what that's brought to your own experience.
Yeah, look, I love talking about this topic, Donald, and you may have to stop me. So I fell in love with football when I was 3, and it was my uncle, who sadly passed away when I was 6. But he taught me how to kick a ball, and somehow I developed this addiction to being connected to a ball. I think my best friend for a long time was the football, and I had a weird obsession with just practicing. I could juggle the ball 1,000 times by the age of 8 or 9. I had a wall at the end of a cul-de-sac that I lived in Caracas, the city I grew up in, and I used to hit free kicks. I used to draw on the wall a goal and hit free kicks and so on. And eventually, somehow, I ended up playing for the national under 15 and under 17 team in Venezuela. South American Cup back then, and I ended up getting a scholarship to go and study in the U.S. and then playing professionally a bit both in Venezuela and in Northern Ireland. But there's a beyond that, because those are kind of facts. The wonder for me of football and of sports in general, I have to say, football happens to be my passion, and I play other sports too, so I'm very keen on sports. Is what it leaves you with for life. So if I was to compare my learning in an academic formal setting versus my learning on a football pitch, I would say that on a football pitch, I have learned a lot more than I have academically. I have learned about discipline. I have learned about dedication. I have learned about teamwork. I have learned about humility. I have learned about taking responsibility for your own performance rather than blaming the conditions. I have learned about learning to lose. I have learned about enjoying when you win. I have learned about cultural differences by playing with international players in international tournaments and so on. So football has been, for me, a development vehicle. And in fact, if I was to trace back the roots of my passion for improvement, and again, I don't think quality improvement is just a method to improve healthcare. Improvement is an inherent trait of a human being. You know, from the time that we learn to latch onto our mother's breast to breastfeed, we try, we test, we fail, we try, we test, we fail, and then eventually we get it. Then we learn to walk, then we learn to run, then we get to, but it's all testing and improving. So we're inherent improvers. But if I was to trace my own journey beyond the humane things like learning to breastfeed, learning to walk, learning to run, it's about football, you know, because I knew that if I just became a player and was happy with juggling the ball 3 times and thought that was great, and with having a relatively good first touch and of training kind of okay, and I wouldn't have gotten anywhere with football, you know, and I never meant to. I never saw that I was going to be a professional player. It just kind of happened, but it happened because of improvement, because I wasn't happy with 3. I thought, how can I get to 10? How can I get to 20? How can I get to 100? How can I get to 1,000? I wasn't happy with the structure of my training. So I thought, what can I tweak in order to improve my stamina, my reaction speed, I was an improver before I knew that I was. And it was before we had all these mad and wonderful data science driven approaches to sports. You know, we didn't have heart monitors to know our distance and our heartbeat, and we didn't have nutritionists who were telling us to eat broccoli after training and to drink. We just kind of had to do it. It was more intuitive. So I trace back the roots of my passion for improvement to football. So it's been a school for life for me, and it continues to be, by the way. I will only stop playing football when my legs say, look, you need to be doing something different. In the meantime, it'll be part of my life for sure.
Well, you still continue to have athletic challenges. So finally, let me ask you about your major challenge this year, which was that enormous climb in South America.
Yeah, well, what a wonderful opportunity, and again, what a privilege. You know, we a group of 4 very close friends went to try to go to the top of Aconcagua. Aconcagua, for people who are listening, is the highest peak in South America. It's almost 7,000 meters, just shy of that, and climbing Aconcagua requires training, a little bit of preparation, or perhaps a lot, because you're exposed to lack of oxygen, which happens at altitude, and extreme weather conditions. And you know, the journey of doing that, Donald, was absolutely wonderful. You know, I learned a lot. You connected me to one of your friends who helped me with some of the science behind altitude and lack of oxygen. So I did a little bit of studying. I did a little bit of visualizing. I looked at videos of Aconcagua to understand the landscape before I walked onto it. And I talked to one of the physical trainers that Ulster Rugby had for years, Johnny, who also told me about the alternatives that I had for preparing, given the lack of altitude in Belfast. So the preparation was amazing. The camaraderie with my friends was incredible, because this was my preparation. My friends were in Miami and in Caracas, so they had different conditions. So we were exchanging notes in the meantime. But getting onto the mountain was incredible. You know, you go in with the philosophy that you espouse and that you want. My philosophy was about three things. One was about safety. So I wasn't keen to be a superhero. I wanted to be safe. Secondly, it was about joy. I wanted to really enjoy every step of the journey. And thirdly, it was about celebration and learning. Celebrating every station. So we got to base camp, we got to camp 1, we got to camp 2. And every time I arrived, it felt like I had achieved my goal because it was something that I had never done before. And it was about learning because I went back to being a beginner, which is something that I've always tried to do in life, just to be on the beginner mode. So I went back to being a beginner. So the expert guides that we had were wonderful. And it was very easy to be a beginner next to them because they were just good teachers. The journey had incredible challenges, incredible beauty, and kind of unique landscapes. The challenges included some of the interpersonal dynamics in a group, which are really fun at the same time when people are at different levels, feeling anxiety about different things, being ambitious in different ways and to different degrees, and being daring or not. So when you're in a group, you can't just go on your own. You have to stay with the group and understand the dynamics of that. The beauty was unparalleled. I've never seen anything like it. Aconcagua is in the very southern tip of South America, which means that the latitude also matters, not just the altitude. And what that meant is that after 3,000 meters, there was no vegetation. So it was all stones and dust, and there were no animals. So you're basically on a landscape that looks a bit like the moon, you know, when you're walking through it. It was incredible. And then the landscape, you could feel the sky. You were a lot closer to the sky physically, actually. And you were looking at the peaks of other mountains down from the top, which was something that I'd never experienced. So between the beauty of the sky at night and during the day, and the ability to look down, you were made to feel like you were on a different dimension, you know. So it was very enjoyable. It had some tricky moments, you know, sleeping at -20, -30 is something I wouldn't recommend to anybody. Actually, it's not pleasant. It's not nice. Sleeping with -20 or 30 with lack of oxygen makes it even harder because your heart's reminding you every so often not to relax too much because you need to stay alive. And that sense of vulnerability is something that you can only surpass, I think, by the company of other human beings. So my tent partner was so helpful in reflecting every night about how we were feeling, whether we were safe or not. We knew there were other tents in the neighborhood, let's call it, and we could relate to them as well if we got up in the middle of the night and so on. So the survival didn't feel so when we were there. It was just about getting on with it. It was good humored. It was challenging at times, but we were together. But that sense of togetherness was so important. And then the last thing I would say is it gave me perspective on the speed of life. There is no way to run. I mean, there's superhumans that maybe can do it. But after 4,500 meters, it's very difficult to go fast, even on a fast walk. So when you're walking very slowly and every step is a breath. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. And every one of those is a step. And you do that for 8 hours. Your mind opens up a little bit more than our daily checking on emails and checking on WhatsApp and checking on social media. And it just gives you a perspective about what's possible with even 10 minutes a day of something like that. So I'm definitely a different human being on the perspective of speed of life, you know, and that trip definitely served for that. I could talk about the trip for hours. I would highly recommend to people who haven't done outdoor active holidays to embark on one, you know, whether it's cycling through the Pyrenees or cycling near your home or taking a very long walk for 10 hours. It gives you a different sense of possibilities intellectually because you free up the mind to be just a little bit more creative. So an amazing trip, highly, highly recommend.
Pedro, thank you very much for sharing so much of your life, your personal philosophy, your professional work, and indeed your sporting challenges. Thank you very much indeed.
Donna, thank you. And thank you for all you're doing through this Medical Voices podcast. I've heard some of the podcasts in the past from friends and others like Victor Montori and Bob Claver and so on. And what a nice job you're doing. So congrats on your contributions to our humanity.
Thank you.